other people's. My personal opinion is that you can't even find an answer to Stonehenge and why it was built, because I think it was built for multiple reasons over a large period of time. I'm going to talk to you in a minute about the different phases that Stonehenge took through when it was built up from 5,000 years ago up until about 3,500 years ago. So almost a period of 1,000 to 1,500 years. 1,000 to 1,500 years, people were building and changing Stonehenge. That's how long it took to build it. So let's put it into like a today's perspective. You saw the Tower of London, right?
Yeah.
And that was built up by William the Conqueror. So let's imagine William the Conqueror wanted to build something, and he told his son, William Rufus, but he didn't write anything down, but he just kept it in his mind, and he described it the best he could, with no drawings, no pictures, just by word of mouth. And then he told his son, he told his son, he told his son, and we go all the way to Queen Elizabeth II today. Do you think over the last 900 years, she would have built the same thing that he thought of 900 years ago? Definitely not. So why were we thinking that because it just seems, 5,000 BC to 4,000 BC, they probably built the same thing and they had the same thing imagined? I don't think that's likely, but you can have your own opinion there. So I think it's changed, and the people that started it were definitely not the same type of people that finished it. And as I'll tell you, society changed hugely during this period, because we essentially go from the Neolithic age, which is the new Stone Age, into the Bronze Age. And at the beginning of the Bronze Age, we incorporate our first farmers, and I think that's got a big thing to do with why Stonehenge is built in its particular way. So with that being said, the first phase of Stonehenge started around 3050 BC. Some people say 3000 BC, some people say 2999 BC. People argue, but it's small amounts of dates that we will never know the exact date, but let's say 3000 BC to cut it nice, easy thing to remember. Stonehenge was nothing more than a circular ditch. So we call it Stonehenge because it's a set of stones in a henge. The first phase of Stonehenge was just a henge. A henge is quite simply when you dig a big circle, and then you, from the stuff that you've dug up, you put a bank on it. Now the whole of the south coast of England is chalk based. It is in Ramsgate, it is in Margate, it is in Dover, the White Cliffs of Dover. It's the same here in Wiltshire, and it's the same in Southampton. Chalk is quite soft, it's what we write on a blackboard with, but you can dig it up fairly easily. It would be easy for us to dig it today because we have diggers. They didn't even have spades 5,000 years ago, so what they had to dig with is Neolithic tools. So quite cleverly they used the deceased animals around them. So to dig, they would use a red deer antler and turn it into a digger, and they would hack away with an antler. To scoop up the hacked up earth, they would use the second tool, which was an ox's shoulder blade, and they would turn it into a scooper. So they dug with the antlers, they scooped up with the shoulder blades, and then they packed it in and they created this circular henge, and that was about 5,000 years ago in 3000 BC. In the 1640s, so a long time after, there was a man called John Aubrey who was the first archaeologist to properly try and study Stonehenge. In fact, he's not even called an archaeologist because that didn't exist back then. He was called an antiquarian, which is a man fascinated with antiquity. So he discovered a series of holes. A series of holes dug just inside this chalk henge, and there's 56 of them in total. He didn't discover all of them, but we name all of them after him because he was the first person to really look at Stonehenge and come up with an answer, who built it and why. He was the first person. Not until 1640 did people start looking, writing things and coming up with theories, and he was a very important man for the start of people studying Stonehenge, John Aubrey. So we call those holes Aubrey holes. People in the 1950s, about 300 years later, there were 3 archaeologists that agreed that they think the holes were dug to put in wooden post holes. Stonehenge is located on an area called the Salisbury Plain, high up on a hill, and they probably put the posts there so that they could see Stonehenge from a distance. Other than that, they might have marked a particular entrance, and the entrance becomes important in the second phase of Stonehenge. So other than these wooden post holes and the actual henge, the second phase is when we see the arrival of the first stones. And we think that was somewhere between 2800 and 2600 BC. Phase 2 of Stonehenge, we see the arrival of a group of stones which we call blue stones. Their official name is Preseli Dolerite stones. We call them Preseli Dolerites because they're from the Preseli Hills, which quite fascinatingly aren't in England. Where did these stones come from? How did they get here? You have to go 200 miles west to find these stones. That's where they're naturally located. So how did people 4,000 years ago get these stones, which from the floor are about that high each? They're about up to the chest of an average human, about 4 feet high, and they weigh up to 3 to 5 tons each, and there's over 80 of these stones which were brought here 4,000 years ago. How did they do it? We think that they were brought on wooden logs, on rafts. From Wales, the Preseli Mountains, they would have gone across the River Severn, down the River Avon, all the way into the Salisbury Plain, and then dragged up the last little bit. That would have taken an incredibly large amount of time. Another important thing to think of, how can you drag these stones that far when history tells us that during this time, 2800 BC, people are hunter-gatherers? Is this possible? Can you be hunter-gathering, looking after your wife and your children, providing them with food, and then say, sorry love, I'm off, I'm going to go 200 miles west, pick up some stones and drag them across to the Salisbury Plain? It's not going to happen. We must see the start of a new society emerging, other people putting up, and as the top guy at the moment with Stonehenge is a guy called Mike Parker Pearson. You'll see his book in the store if you want to get it. He says